The slap knocked Angela's earbud onto the pavement. She touched her burning cheek and said quietly, "You just assaulted me." No one moved. James kept recording as Callahan reached for his cuffs. Then a black city SUV turned onto the street. Angela stayed calm, but the driver's face went pale the moment she saw her. Callahan had missed something, and the truth was seconds away. The slap came so suddenly that Angela Carter's left earbud struck the pavement before anyone on Cedar Ridge seemed to understand what Sergeant Mark Callahan had done. For one suspended second, the whole street went quiet. Angela stood beneath the bright Ohio sun, with one hand halfway raised toward her face. She was 48, black, athletic, dressed in a faded gray sweatshirt and dark running clothes that carried the damp marks of a long morning jog. Sweat glistened along her temples. Her breathing was still elevated from the run. Now there was something else in her expression. Pain. Not fear. Not yet. Pain mixed with the weary recognition of a moment she had spent much of her adult life hoping she would never experience this way again. Callahan stood less than 3 feet from her. At 45, he had spent enough years wearing a West Haven police uniform that authority seemed to have settled into his posture. His shoulders were squared. His jaw was tight. One hand hovered near his duty belt. He looked almost as surprised by the slap as Angela did. Almost. Angela slowly touched her cheek. Across the street, retired transit mechanic James Walker, 62, had stopped beside the railing of his front porch. His phone was already in his hand. A woman near a stone mailbox stared. Another adult stood frozen beside an open garage. Nobody spoke. Angela bent her eyes toward the earbud lying near her shoe, then raised them to Callahan. "You just assaulted me." Her voice was quiet. That quietness unsettled him more than shouting would have. Callahan's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I told you to cooperate." Angela looked at him for another long second. 20 minutes earlier, Cedar Ridge had seemed almost peaceful enough to make her forget how quickly ordinary things could change. The neighborhood sat on the northern edge of West Haven, Ohio, where broad sidewalks curved beneath mature maple trees and carefully trimmed hedges separated expensive brick homes from the street. Saturday sunlight flashed across polished windows and chrome mailboxes. Sprinklers hissed over green lawns. Somewhere behind one of the houses, a lawnmower droned steadily. Angela had been running at an easy pace. No rush. No destination anyone else needed to know about. Her gray sweatshirt was old enough that the cuffs had softened from years of washing. She could easily have replaced it, but she liked the way it fit. Her running shoes were practical rather than fashionable. A small zippered pouch rested securely at her waist. One earbud carried soft music. The other left her aware of traffic. That was how she heard the patrol cruiser slow behind her. She had glanced toward it once. West Haven police. Nothing unusual about that. She kept running. Inside the cruiser, Mark Callahan watched her pass a silver Tesla parked in the driveway of a large stone front house. There had been no alarm, no call about a burglary, no description of a suspect, no resident waving for help. Just Angela. Callahan drove another half block before checking his mirror. She never looked back at him. That bothered him. He eased off the accelerator. Angela turned onto Hawthorne Lane, maintaining the same steady rhythm. Callahan followed, telling himself he was simply observing. Then he told himself the neighborhood had experienced property concerns. Then he told himself experienced officers noticed things other people missed. By the time Angela reached the next intersection, Callahan had transformed a feeling into suspicion. He pulled to the curb. The short burst of his siren made Angela stop. She turned, removed one earbud, and waited as Callahan stepped from the cruiser. "Morning," she said. Callahan studied her before answering. "Where are you coming from?" Angela's eyebrows lifted slightly. "My home." "Where's that?" She looked down the street. "Not far." Callahan took another step. "I need you to be more specific." Angela's breathing slowed. "Why?" It was a simple question. Callahan heard a challenge. "I'm conducting an investigation." "Into what?" His eyes moved past her toward the homes. "We've had some concerns about suspicious activity in the area." Angela waited. When nothing else came, she asked, "Was a crime reported?" I'm asking the questions. That sentence changed something. Not visibly enough for Callahan to understand it, but Angela felt an old heaviness settle inside her. She knew this rhythm. A vague accusation. A demand for obedience. Then irritation when the person being questioned wanted to know why. She had spent years believing institutions could become better than the instincts of the people inside them. She still believed it. But belief did not make moments like this hurt less. Callahan nodded toward the street behind her. I saw you checking out that Tesla. Angela glanced back. The silver car sat untouched in its driveway. I ran past it. You were looking toward the property. I was jogging. Do you live in Cedar Ridge? Angela looked directly at him. Yes. Something about the certainty of the answer irritated him. Identification. Angela was silent for a moment. Then she said, What is the legal reason you're asking me for identification? Callahan's jaw tightened. I need to establish who you are. You stopped me. I'm asking why. Because I'm investigating suspicious activity. What suspicious activity did you personally observe? Callahan stepped closer. Angela did not. A curtain moved in a nearby window. Across the street, James Walker had noticed the cruiser. At first, he assumed Callahan was giving directions to a jogger. Then he noticed Angela's posture. Still, careful. James knew that posture. He had worn it himself once. His hand moved toward his pocket. Callahan pointed toward Angela's waist. You carrying ID in there? Angela followed his gaze to the small running pouch. I'm carrying personal belongings. I asked whether you have identification. And I asked why you stopped me. Callahan exhaled sharply. Ma'am, this can be very simple if you cooperate. Angela felt the words more deeply than she wanted him to see. Cooperate. As though she had already done something wrong. As though dignity itself had become resistance. Still, she kept her voice measured. Sergeant, I'm standing here. I haven't threatened you. I haven't tried to leave. I'm asking you to explain the basis for this stop. Callahan blinked. She had noticed his rank. Her eyes dropped briefly toward his nameplate. Mark Callahan. Then toward his badge. May I have your badge number? Callahan's face changed. Excuse me? Your badge number. Why? Angela almost smiled at the irony. Instead, she reached slowly toward the phone secured in her pouch. I'm going to document this interaction. Callahan moved immediately. Keep your hands where I can see them. Angela stopped. My hand is going to my phone. I said stop. She froze with her fingers several inches from the zipper. James had come down one porch step. His phone was now recording. The woman at the mailbox, Emily Grant, an emergency room nurse, had stopped sorting her mail entirely. Angela looked at Callahan. Your name and badge number, please. Ma'am, you need to follow instructions. I am following your instructions. Now I'm asking you to identify yourself. Callahan moved closer. Angela could smell coffee on his breath. Don't tell me how to do my job. I didn't. You're making this difficult. No, Sergeant. I'm asking why a woman jogging home has become the subject of a police investigation. A muscle jumped in Callahan's cheek. Give me your ID. I'm not reaching into my pouch until you make it clear that I can move my hands. Then tell me your full name. Angela stared at him. The street seemed strangely loud now despite the silence. The sprinklers, leaves shifting overhead, a distant truck changing gears. No. Callahan's eyes narrowed. No. Not until you explain the lawful basis for detaining me. James lifted his phone higher. Callahan saw him. Something changed again. Now there was an audience. Angela noticed the shift in his expression and understood the danger before he moved. Sergeant. Callahan grabbed her wrist. Angela stumbled half a step. Let go of me. Stop resisting. I am not resisting. He twisted her arm behind her. Pain shot through her shoulder. Emily took one involuntary step from her mailbox. James kept recording. Officer, he called. She isn't fighting you. Stay back. Angela turned her head toward James. Please keep recording. Callahan's face flushed. Face forward. Angela tried to look back at him. I want your badge number on the record. His open hand struck her cheek. The sound carried farther than either of them expected. Her earbud bounced once against the pavement. Angela staggered but stayed upright. Nobody moved. That silence hurt in a way the slap could not. For a moment, Angela saw only bright pavement and the blurred edge of Callahan's uniform. Then the world sharpened again. She straightened, touched her cheek, looked at him. "You just assaulted me." James's phone remained pointed at them. Emily stared at Callahan in disbelief. Callahan's chest rose and fell. Whatever part of him knew he had crossed a line was being buried beneath something stronger. Pride, fear, or the desperate need to make everything he had already done appear justified. His hand dropped toward his belt. Angela watched him reach for the handcuffs. She did not threaten him. She did not tell him who she was. She did not reach toward the small running pouch resting against her waist. If Callahan had opened it then, beneath the phone and house key, he would have found an old piece of scratched brass, no bigger than his palm. 22 years of history were engraved into it. 2 words sat beneath the worn seal of the very department whose uniform he wore. "Serve first." Callahan pulled the handcuffs free. He still believed Angela Carter was the one who needed to explain why she belonged there. He had no idea that before the morning was over, he would be the one struggling to explain himself. Hours before Sergeant Mark Callahan reached for those handcuffs, Angela Carter had been standing beneath the warm yellow lights of Morning Star Community Kitchen with a cardboard box of canned beans balanced against her hip. Saturday mornings in West Haven's South End began differently from mornings in Cedar Ridge. There were no stone mailboxes here. No landscaped circles or polished electric cars resting behind ornamental gates. Morning buses groaned along cracked streets. Delivery trucks rattled behind small restaurants. The smell of coffee, frying onions, and fresh bread drifted from the kitchen whenever someone pushed through the swinging doors. Angela preferred it that way. At 48, she could have spent that morning sleeping late, preparing for Monday, or reviewing the mountain of documents waiting for her at West Haven Police Headquarters. Instead, she had arrived at Morning Star shortly after 6. Her faded gray sweatshirt was already dusted with flour near one sleeve. "Those go in the pantry," Helen Price called from behind a stainless steel counter. "And before you pretend you didn't hear me, that means you carry 1 box at a time." Angela looked down at the 2 boxes stacked in her arms. "Helen, I've carried heavier things. You're 48, not 28. Angela smiled. "And you're 67. But I saw you trying to move that folding table by yourself." Helen pointed a wooden spoon at her. "That is completely different." "Of course it is." Morning Star had been part of Angela's life long before she had a badge. Long before anyone called her Chief Carter. Back then, she had simply been Walter Carter's daughter. Walter had spent most of his adult life working at a machine parts factory on the south side of West Haven. He had been a proud man, the kind who repaired his own appliances and pressed his work shirts even when the collars were beginning to fray. Then the factory cut jobs. Walter lost his. For several difficult months, money disappeared faster than pride could adjust. Angela never forgot the first time her father walked through Morning Star's doors. He had been a grown man embarrassed by an empty refrigerator. The volunteers had not asked him how he had failed. They had simply fed him. Years later, Walter would tell Angela that kindness offered without humiliation was one of the purest forms of respect. He had been 63 when he died, but that lesson remained. Angela carried another box into the pantry. Helen followed and frowned at a wooden shelf sagging badly beneath several bags of rice. "I told them that thing was coming loose." Angela crouched. One metal bracket had pulled away from the wall. "Do you have a screwdriver?" Helen stared at her. "You're supposed to be helping with food." "I am helping with food. I'm preventing it from landing on your feet." 5 minutes later, Angela was on one knee tightening the bracket, while Helen held the shelf steady. Neither woman noticed James Walker enter through the rear door carrying 2 bags of donated coffee. At 62, James had the heavy hands and slightly rounded shoulders of a man who had spent decades repairing city buses. Retirement had slowed his schedule, but not his need to stay useful. He set the coffee down. "You charging for repairs now, Angela?" Angela glanced over her shoulder. "Absolutely." James nodded seriously. "How much?" 1 cup of coffee. Highway robbery. Inflation." James laughed. Nobody in the kitchen asked why Angela had returned to West Haven after years away. Nobody asked about Monday. Angela had told Helen only that she was beginning a new job. That was enough. There was comfort in being somewhere that did not care about titles. An older volunteer struggled to lift a large stock pot from a low shelf. Angela noticed immediately, stood, and crossed the room. "I've got it. I can manage." "I know you can." Angela lifted it anyway, then added gently, "But you don't have to." The volunteer smiled. That distinction mattered to Angela. Helping someone did not require treating them as helpless. By 7:30, trays clattered across stainless steel counters and the dining room filled with the low hum of adult voices. Angela carried coffee, wiped tables, and listened more than she spoke. A man worried about an upcoming rent increase. A woman described caring for an injured sister after work. James complained about the Cleveland baseball team as if its failures were a personal betrayal. Ordinary worries, ordinary dignity. Angela loved that about Morningstar. Before she left, Helen caught her near the pantry. "You forgot this." She held out Angela's small running pouch. Angela took it. The zipper had opened slightly. Something brass-colored glinted inside. Helen noticed. "What's that?" Angela hesitated, then pulled it free. The coin was scratched along its edges and worn smooth in places from years of handling. On one side was the old seal of the West Haven Police Department. On the other were two engraved words. "Serve first." Helen turned it carefully in her fingers. "This looks older than me." "Careful." Helen laughed. "How long have you had it?" 22 years. "For what?" Angela looked at the coin. For a moment, Morningstar disappeared. She remembered being a much younger officer in West Haven. She remembered late nights in the South End. Adults who distrusted police because experience had taught them to, and supervisors who believed enforcement was easier than listening. She remembered helping build a diversion program intended to keep minor encounters from becoming permanent wounds between neighborhoods and police. She also remembered what came afterward. A promotion she had earned but did not receive. Questions about whether she was a good fit. Closed-door conversations after she reported discriminatory treatment she believed had been ignored. The polite suggestion that advancement might come more easily if she stopped making leadership uncomfortable. Angela had eventually left West Haven, not because the city meant nothing to her, because it meant too much to stay and become bitter. Walter had been alive then. She could still remember sitting at his kitchen table after telling him she was leaving. "You angry?" he had asked. "Yes." "Good." Angela had stared at him. Walter had smiled. "Anger tells you something matters. Just don't let it tell you who to become." Years later, Angela still carried that sentence with her. "And the coin." Helen handed it back. "Must mean something. It reminds me of something." "What?" Angela slipped it into the pouch. "That the words on a badge don't matter if the person wearing it forgets why they're there." Helen studied her. "You sure this new job of yours isn't going to make you serious?" Angela smiled. Too late. Outside, sunlight had begun washing over the South End. Angela hugged Helen, shook James's hand, and stepped onto the sidewalk. Her temporary townhouse in Cedar Ridge was a short drive north. She planned to change into running clothes, take a 40-minute jog, shower, and later meet Captain Rebecca Foster for a quiet neighborhood tour before Monday. Monday. The word carried more weight than anyone at Morningstar knew. On Monday morning, Angela Carter would formally take command of the West Haven Police Department. She had deliberately kept the weekend private. There would be photographs soon enough, speeches, introductions, people standing straighter because of the title attached to her name. For one more morning, Angela wanted to be simply Angela. Before getting into her car, she saw James through the kitchen window lifting another box. She tapped the glass and pointed at his back. "One at a time," she mouthed. James rolled his eyes. Angela laughed and drove away. 40 minutes later, she changed into the same faded gray sweatshirt and stepped outside in Cedar Ridge. She carried no badge, no department credentials, nothing that announced rank or authority. Only her house key, her phone, an earbud case, a folded $5 bill, and the scratched brass coin inside her running pouch. "Serve first." Angela started jogging beneath the maple trees. She did not know that Sergeant Mark Callahan was already patrolling 3 streets away. She did not know he would see her pass a silver Tesla. And she could not know that, before the morning ended, a man wearing the same department seal engraved on that old coin would look at her skin, her clothes, and the neighborhood around her, and decide the promise on the coin did not apply to her. Angela had been running for less than 20 minutes when the patrol cruiser slowed behind her. At first, she ignored it. Cedar Ridge was quiet enough that every engine sounded louder than it should. Sprinklers clicked across trimmed lawns. A delivery van idled near the corner. Somewhere farther down Hawthorne Lane, wind stirred the leaves of a maple tree tall enough to shade half the sidewalk. Angela kept her pace steady. The silver Tesla sat in a driveway to her right, clean enough to reflect the blue sky. She glanced toward it only because sunlight flashed off the windshield. That was all. Inside the cruiser, Sergeant Mark Callahan watched the glance and gave it meaning. He had already noticed Angela once when she crossed Brookstone Avenue. A black woman. Faded gray sweatshirt. Running alone through Cedar Ridge. Nothing illegal. Nothing even unusual. Yet Callahan had spent enough years convincing himself that instinct came before evidence that the difference no longer mattered much to him. He eased the cruiser forward. Angela turned onto the next block. Callahan followed. He told himself he was checking the area. Then he told himself that people casing houses often tried to appear casual. Then he told himself that if Angela belonged in Cedar Ridge, she would have no reason to object to a simple question. By the time he activated the short burst of his siren, he had built an entire story around a woman whose name he did not know. Angela slowed, then stopped. She removed one earbud. Callahan parked at the curb and stepped out. His boots struck the pavement with the practiced confidence of a man used to being obeyed. "Morning." Angela gave him a brief nod. "Morning, officer." "Where are you headed?" Angela looked down the road. "Home? Where's home?" She turned back to him. "Why?" Callahan's face did not change, but something in his posture did. "I asked you a question, and I asked you one." He moved a little closer. Angela noticed the badge, the body camera mounted on his chest, the radio clipped near his shoulder, the hand resting near his duty belt. She also noticed the camera's status light. Dark. That detail stayed with her. Callahan nodded toward the houses behind her. "We've had property concerns around here." "What kind of concerns?" "Suspicious activity. Was something reported this morning?" Callahan hesitated. Angela saw it. "No." The answer came out sharper than he intended. Then he corrected himself. "I'm making sure everything is in order." Angela glanced once toward the street. "No alarm?" Callahan said nothing. "No call for service?" His jaw tightened. "Ma'am, do you live in this neighborhood?" "Yes." "Where?" "A few blocks from here." "I need an address." Angela's breathing had almost returned to normal from the run, but she could feel another kind of pressure building in her chest. Not panic. Recognition. She had seen this kind of stop before. She had reviewed complaints built around it. She had trained younger officers to avoid exactly this progression. Vague suspicion, escalating demands, then the officer interpreting reasonable questions as defiance. She had not imagined standing on the other side of it in a faded sweatshirt. "Why do you need my address?" Callahan let out a short breath. "Because I'm trying to determine whether you belong here." The words landed between them. Angela held his gaze. There it was. Not crime. Belonging. Across the street, James Walker stepped onto his porch carrying a ceramic coffee mug. He noticed the cruiser first, then Angela, then Callahan. James did not know Angela well. He knew her from Morning Star, knew she helped carry boxes, knew she listened more than she talked. That was enough for him to recognize that something was wrong. Angela had not raised her voice. Callahan already looked angry. James set the coffee down on the porch rail. Angela spoke carefully. "I do belong here. Then this should be easy." Callahan extended his hand. "Identification." Angela looked at the open palm, then at him. "For what?" "To verify who you are." "What crime do you suspect me of committing?" Callahan's eyes narrowed. "I already explained that." "No, you said there were property concerns. I saw you looking at that Tesla back there." Angela turned slightly and looked toward the distant driveway. "The car parked in front of the house?" "Yes." "I ran past it." "You looked at it?" Angela almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in her face, So looking at a parked car is now suspicious? You're twisting my words. I'm repeating them. Callahan stepped closer. You have ID or not? Angela remained where she was. I'm not required to carry identification to go jogging. That's not what I asked. It is the answer. At the mailbox 2 houses down, Emily Grant had come outside with a small stack of envelopes in one hand. She was 34, still wearing the navy pants from an overnight emergency room shift. She stopped when she heard Callahan's tone. Angela saw her. Emily quickly looked down at the mail. That hurt more than Angela expected. Not because Emily owed her rescue, because Angela knew exactly why adults sometimes looked away when authority became uncomfortable. They told themselves they had not seen enough. They told themselves it was not their business. They told themselves someone else would speak first. Callahan pointed toward Angela's waist. What's in the pouch? Personal belongings. Identification? Angela did not answer immediately. Callahan mistook the pause for uncertainty. I'm not going to stand here all morning. Angela looked directly at the nameplate on his uniform. Callahan. Sergeant Callahan. His eyebrows shifted. She had noticed his rank. Yes? What specific facts gave you reasonable suspicion that I was committing, or was about to commit a crime? For the first time, Callahan looked genuinely thrown. Angela's language was too precise, too controlled. It did not match the role he had assigned her. His uncertainty lasted only a second. Then pride covered it. Don't lecture me on police work. I'm asking you to explain your police work. James slowly reached into his pocket. His phone came out. Callahan noticed the movement across the street. Sir, he called, stay where you are. James stopped beside his porch steps. I'm on my property. I said stay back. I'm staying back. James unlocked his phone. The camera opened. Angela saw it happen. She felt a small measure of relief. Callahan saw it too. His mouth tightened. Now there would be a record beyond his report. Angela looked back at him. Am I free to leave? Callahan paused again. That question forced a choice. If she was free to leave, the interrogation ended. If she was not, he had to justify why. You're being detained while I investigate. Investigate what? I'm done repeating myself. Then tell me the offense once. Callahan's face reddened. Emily had stopped pretending to read her mail. James's phone was now raised chest high. A lawnmower across the block went silent. The street felt smaller. Callahan took one step closer. Angela did not retreat. Show me your ID. Her voice remained level. No. Callahan stared at her. Angela continued before he could respond. I am not refusing a lawful order. I am asking you to identify the lawful basis for detaining me. You're being difficult. I'm being clear. You people always think... Callahan stopped himself. The unfinished sentence hung there. Angela's eyes hardened. What people? He looked away for half a second, then back. People who think they know the law better than the police. Angela absorbed that quietly. Her cheek had not yet been struck. Her wrists had not yet been cuffed. But something inside her had already been wounded. She had spent years training officers to understand that authority without discipline became fear, and fear without accountability became abuse. Now she was watching the lesson disappear in real time. Still, she refused to give Callahan anger he could use against her. She took one slow breath, then another. Sergeant Callahan, I'm going to ask for your badge number. His expression changed. James raised his phone slightly higher. Emily looked up. Angela reached one hand slowly toward the zipper of her running pouch. My phone is inside. I'm going to record this interaction. Callahan's hand shot forward. Don't move. Angela froze. Her fingertips stopped inches from the zipper. Fine. Hands where I can see them. They are where you can see them. Keep them there. Angela lifted both hands slightly away from her body. Now give me your badge number. Callahan stared at her. He had wanted obedience. Instead, she had given him calm. That seemed to make him angrier. Across the street, James's phone captured every second. Inside Angela's pouch, beside her phone and house key, the scratched brass coin rested against the fabric. Serve first. For 22 years, Angela had carried it as a reminder that authority began with restraint. Mark Callahan was about to prove how dangerous authority became when restraint disappeared. Angela kept both hands where he could see them. "Your badge number, Sergeant." Callahan stared at her as if the request itself were an insult. "You need to worry about following my instructions." "I am following them." "Then stop arguing." "I'm not arguing. I'm asking you to identify yourself and explain why I'm being detained." Across the street, James Walker held his phone steady. The red recording symbol glowed on the screen. He had learned 8 months earlier that memory alone was rarely enough when one person wore a badge and the other did not. He had learned how quickly a calm question could become non-compliance in a written report. Most of all, he had learned how lonely it felt to tell the truth after everyone else had gone home. "So this time," he recorded. Emily Grant remained beside her mailbox, envelopes pressed against her navy work pants. Exhaustion from her overnight emergency room shift had disappeared. Her attention was fixed entirely on Angela and Callahan. Angela slowly turned one palm outward. "My phone is inside the pouch. You told me not to reach for it, so I won't. But I am telling you clearly that I intend to record this encounter. You don't dictate how this goes. I'm not trying to." Callahan stepped closer. "You've been confrontational from the moment I stopped you." Angela felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. Confrontational. Another word that could be written later. Another word that could transform questions into aggression and dignity into defiance. She kept her voice low. "Your body camera doesn't appear to be recording." Callahan's eyes flicked downward for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Angela saw it. James's phone saw the movement too. "That's none of your concern. It became my concern when you detained me." Callahan reached toward her arm. Angela instinctively shifted back. "Do not touch me." His hand closed around her wrist. The pressure was immediate. "Turn around." "For what?" "Turn around. What crime am I suspected of?" Callahan pulled. Angela stumbled half a step before regaining her balance. "Sergeant, let go of my wrist. Stop resisting." "I am not resisting." James came down one porch step. "She's not fighting you." Callahan snapped his head toward him. "Stay back." James stopped. "I'm standing on my own property. Then stay there." "I am." His phone remained raised. That seemed to bother Callahan most. Angela felt his fingers tighten around her wrist. He pulled her arm behind her back. A sharp ache traveled into her shoulder. She drew a breath through clenched teeth. "Sergeant Callahan, you are hurting me. Then quit pulling away." "I'm standing still." Emily finally moved from the mailbox. Only one step. But Angela noticed. "Officer," Emily said carefully. "She hasn't done anything." Callahan looked toward her. "Ma'am, do not interfere." "I'm not interfering. Then go inside." Emily did not move. The envelopes trembled slightly in her hand. Another adult had appeared near a driveway farther down the street. Someone else stood behind a half-open front door. They watched. Nobody came closer. Angela knew why. Callahan had a uniform, a weapon, a patrol car, an official voice. The symbols surrounding him told everyone that challenging him carried risk. That was precisely why the person wearing those symbols was supposed to exercise more restraint, not less. Angela turned her head toward James. "Please keep recording." Callahan jerked her arm higher. "I told you to face forward." "James, keep recording." "Face forward!" Angela looked back toward Callahan. "I want your badge number on the record." His face had gone red. "You need to shut your mouth and follow instructions." Angela's expression changed. Not anger, disappointment. "Is that how you speak to everyone who asks you to explain yourself?" Callahan's hand moved before anyone expected it. The slap cracked through the still morning. Angela's head snapped sideways. Her earbud flew free, struck the pavement, and bounced near the curb. James's phone dipped. Emily gasped. The envelope slipped from her hand, white paper scattering around her shoes. Even Callahan froze. For one terrible second, Cedar Ridge became completely silent. No one spoke from the porches. No one shouted from the driveways. The only sound was a sprinkler ticking across a lawn. Angela stared at the pavement. Her cheek burned. She tasted the faint metallic trace of blood where the inside of her mouth had caught against her teeth. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, and beneath the physical pain came something older. A memory of rooms where she had been expected to stay composed while other people questioned whether she belonged. A promotion denied after she had spoken about discriminatory treatment. Closed doors, careful smiles, advice to be patient, advice to be less difficult. Walter's voice came back to her from years earlier. Anger tells you something matters. Just don't let it tell you who to become. Angela slowly straightened. She did not raise her hand. She did not curse. She did not shove Callahan. She touched her cheek once. Then she looked directly into his eyes. You just assaulted me. Callahan swallowed. His gaze shifted briefly toward James's phone. The recording had not stopped. You pulled away. No. You refused commands. I asked questions. You were resisting. I was standing still. Each answer came quietly. Each one made his version harder to sustain. Emily bent to retrieve one of the envelopes, but her eyes never left them. I saw it, she said. Callahan turned. What? Emily stood slowly. She didn't hit you. She didn't threaten you. Ma'am, back up. You slapped her. I said back up. Emily flinched. She stopped speaking. That silence seemed to restore something in Callahan. Control, or what he mistook for control. He reached toward the handcuff case on his belt. Angela watched him. Think carefully about what you do next. Callahan pulled the cuffs free. Turn around. You still haven't identified a crime. Hands behind your back. I'm already being held by you. Hands behind your back. Angela could have told him. 4 words would have changed everything. I'm your new chief. She could have watched his hand release her wrist. Could have watched his voice soften. Could have watched respect appear the instant he learned she possessed power over him. But another thought stopped her. James. Emily. The people whose names she did not know watching from their homes. And all the adults who might have stood where she stood without a title capable of protecting them. If Callahan needed to know who she was before deciding how much dignity she deserved, then the problem was already bigger than Angela Carter. So she said nothing about Monday, nothing about West Haven Police Headquarters, nothing about Captain Rebecca Foster. She simply brought her hands behind her back. Callahan snapped one cuff around her wrist. The metal was cold against warm skin. Then the second. He tightened it. Angela winced. Too tight. You should have cooperated. James's jaw clenched behind his phone. Angela raised her head. Whatever happens next, remember that you chose it. Callahan guided her toward the patrol cruiser. He reached for the radio clipped near his shoulder. Dispatch, I've got 1 female detained. Possible obstruction and resisting. Subject was combative during investigation. James stared at his phone screen in disbelief. Emily whispered, That's not what happened. Angela heard both of them. She also heard Callahan repeat the word combative. A new version of the morning was being built in real time. One that turned a jogger into a suspect. Questions into resistance. A slap into procedure. And silence into permission. Angela stood cuffed beside the cruiser while Callahan spoke into his radio. Against her waist rested the small running pouch he had not yet searched. Inside it, the scratched brass coin pressed against her house key. Serve first. Callahan had just created a false story about the woman wearing it. He had no idea how many other stories were waiting to be reopened once the truth about hers came out. Combative female, the dispatcher repeated through his radio. Confirm obstruction and resisting? Callahan glanced at Angela. She stood beside the cruiser with her hands cuffed behind her, her left cheek still red from the slap. There was no kicking, shouting, threatening, or struggling. Nothing in the picture matched the words he had just transmitted. He pressed the radio button. Affirmative. Angela closed her eyes for half a second. There it was. Not confusion. Not a misunderstanding. A choice. You know that isn't true, she said. Callahan clipped the radio back onto his shoulder. You refused to cooperate. I asked why you stopped me. You refused identification. That isn't resisting. You pulled away when I tried to detain you. You grabbed my wrist without explaining why. Callahan's eyes shifted toward James Walker. The phone was still recording. Sir, I've already warned you. James stood on the edge of his lawn, his expression tight. And I'm still on my property. Turn the camera off. No. Callahan stared at him. James's hand trembled slightly, but he did not lower the phone. 8 months earlier, he had not possessed a recording. He had possessed only his memory and a complaint form. That had not been enough. This time would be different. A dark blue sedan slowed as it approached the cluster of people, then pulled against the curb. The driver's door opened, and Daniel Brooks stepped out. At 39, Daniel was a civil rights attorney who had spent enough time around police reports to recognize the distance that could grow between an event and the official language later used to describe it. He wore dark slacks and an open-collar shirt, with his suit jacket folded over the passenger seat. Several flattened cardboard boxes and empty food donation crates were visible in the back. He had just left Morning Star. Daniel looked first at Angela's cuffed hands, then at her cheek, then at James's phone. What happened? Callahan moved immediately. Sir, keep moving. Daniel stopped well outside arm's reach. I'm not approaching you. This is an active investigation. What are you investigating? Callahan's face tightened. I said keep moving. Daniel looked toward Angela. She gave him no signal beyond a calm, steady gaze. He turned back to Callahan. Sergeant, I'm standing on a public sidewalk at a safe distance. I asked what the original suspected offense was. You her lawyer? No. Then this doesn't concern you. Daniel glanced toward the adults watching from the surrounding houses. It concerns everyone who just watched you put a woman in handcuffs. Callahan took one step toward him. Back up. Daniel did. Exactly one step. The movement removed Callahan's easiest excuse to escalate. Fine, Daniel said. From here. What was the original offense? Callahan pointed vaguely down Hawthorne Lane. Suspicious activity involving private property. What activity? She was checking vehicles and residences. Angela turned her head. That is false. Be quiet. Daniel's expression sharpened. Was there a complainant? Callahan did not answer. A reported theft? Nothing. An alarm? Callahan's voice rose. I don't have to explain my investigation to you. Daniel remained calm. No, but eventually you may have to explain it to someone. The words hung in the warm air. Callahan looked toward James's phone again, then toward Emily Grant. Emily was still standing beside her mailbox. The envelopes she had dropped were gathered against her chest now. She had spent her career in emergency rooms watching frightened adults search the faces of people in authority for reassurance. She knew what fear looked like. Angela was controlling hers. Callahan was not. Emily swallowed. She never touched you. Callahan turned sharply. What did you say? Emily's voice wavered, but she repeated it. She never touched you. I watched the whole thing. You need to go back inside. I live here. I said go inside. Emily stared at him. For a moment, Angela thought she might obey. Instead, Emily shook her head. No. The word was barely above a whisper, but it changed the street. James kept recording. Daniel remained on the sidewalk. Emily stayed beside the mailbox. The crowd had not become brave all at once. No one rushed Callahan. No one shouted. They simply stopped disappearing. Angela felt something loosen inside her chest. Not relief. Something closer to hope. Callahan seemed to feel the shift too. He returned to Angela. Do you have anything on you I need to know about? My phone, house key, and personal belongings. Any weapons? No. Identification? Angela looked at him. You're still trying to justify the stop after the fact. I'm making sure you don't have anything dangerous. My hands are cuffed behind me. Callahan reached toward the small pouch at her waist. Angela's voice sharpened. I do not consent to a search. I heard you. Then don't search it. Callahan unzipped the pouch. Daniel immediately spoke. She expressly withheld consent. Callahan ignored him. He removed Angela's phone first and placed it on the hood of the cruiser. Then her house key. A folded $5 bill. The small earbud case. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that rescued his story. His fingers went back inside. They touched metal. Callahan pulled out the scratched brass coin. Sunlight caught along its worn edge. He frowned. It was heavier than an ordinary souvenir. The old West Haven Police Department seal was stamped deeply into one side. He turned it over. 2 words had been engraved into the brass. "Serve first." For the first time since the stop began, Callahan said nothing. Angela watched his face. The anger did not disappear, but uncertainty entered beside it. James adjusted the zoom on his phone. Daniel leaned slightly forward. Emily stared at the coin. Callahan rubbed his thumb across the old seal. Something about it looked official. Something about Angela's calm suddenly felt different. He looked at her. "Where did you get this?" Angela's cuffed hands remained behind her. Her cheek still burned, yet her voice was almost gentle. "Do you recognize it?" Callahan looked down again. He did not, and admitting that seemed to embarrass him. "It's a challenge coin. That wasn't my question." His eyes hardened. "Anybody can buy one of these online." Angela held his gaze. "Not that one." A faint breeze moved through the trees. James zoomed closer. The old seal filled his phone screen. A memory stirred somewhere in him. An old newspaper photograph, perhaps, or a ceremony from years ago when West Haven had honored officers for community service. He could not place it. "Not yet." Callahan gave a dismissive laugh. "You expect me to believe this proves something?" Angela looked at the coin, then back at the uniformed man holding it. "It proves something to me." "What?" "That you don't recognize the promise you're supposed to be keeping." Callahan's face flushed again. He tossed the coin onto the cruiser hood. It struck the metal with a sharp little clang and spun twice before settling beside Angela's phone and house key. James's camera caught every second. Callahan reached for his radio again, trying to reclaim the rhythm of authority. But before he could speak, Daniel looked past him. A vehicle had turned onto Hawthorne Lane. Black, large, city-issued. Its windows were dark enough that the driver could not yet be seen. Angela saw it too. For the first time all morning, something changed in her eyes. Callahan noticed. The SUV slowed as it approached the patrol cruiser, then stopped. The driver's door opened. Captain Rebecca Foster stepped onto the pavement. She looked first at Callahan, then at the gathering witnesses, then at Angela Carter standing beside the cruiser in handcuffs. Foster's face lost all color. For several seconds, Captain Rebecca Foster did not move. The Black City SUV idled behind her, sunlight flashing across the windshield. The street that had already gone quiet seemed to tighten around the new arrival. Callahan straightened automatically. "Captain." Foster did not answer. Her eyes moved over Angela with the precision of someone trained to notice details. The faded gray sweatshirt, the cuffed wrists, the red mark on Angela's cheek, the small smear of blood at the inside corner of her lip, then the patrol cruiser hood, Angela's phone, her house key, and the scratched brass coin lying between them. Foster's expression changed again. Not recognition yet. Something closer to disbelief. Callahan took a step toward her. "Captain, I can explain." Foster finally looked at him. "What happened?" Her voice was low. That made Callahan more nervous than shouting would have. "I observed suspicious activity in the neighborhood. The subject refused identification and became confrontational when I attempted to investigate." Angela said nothing. James kept recording. Daniel Brooks folded his arms. Emily Grant stood beside the mailbox, watching Foster with the cautious hope of someone who was not yet sure whether another uniform would make things better or worse. Foster glanced at Angela. "Were you injured?" Callahan answered first. "She resisted when I tried to. I wasn't asking you." The words cut cleanly across him. Foster stepped closer to Angela. "Ma'am?" Angela held her gaze. "My cheek hurts. My wrists are too tight." Foster's jaw hardened. Callahan immediately reached for an explanation. She was combative. James spoke from across the street. "No, she wasn't." Callahan spun toward him. "I told you." Foster raised one hand. "Sergeant." He stopped. Daniel stepped forward only enough to be heard clearly. "I arrived after the handcuffing, Captain, but I heard Sergeant Callahan give 3 different explanations for the detention. There was no complainant identified. No reported offense identified. and the woman expressly refused consent before he searched her pouch. Callahan stared at him. Foster looked toward the items on the hood. You searched her? For officer safety. Angela finally spoke. My hands were already cuffed behind me. The sentence landed heavily. Foster turned back to Callahan. What did you find? Nothing dangerous? Then why is her property on your hood? Callahan opened his mouth. Closed it. Foster looked toward James. How long have you been recording? Since before he grabbed her. Callahan's face tightened. James raised the phone slightly. I got the slap too. Foster's eyes returned to Angela's cheek. For 1 second, something personal flashed through her expression. Angela saw it. So did Callahan. He began talking faster. Captain, she kept refusing orders. She wouldn't give me her name. She challenged the stop. She reached toward that pouch after I told her not to, and then she pulled away when I tried to detain her. Emily shook her head. That isn't what happened. Callahan snapped. You need to stop interfering. Foster turned on him. She's a witness. Callahan fell silent. The change in power was small but unmistakable. A few minutes earlier, his voice had controlled the street. Now every sentence he spoke seemed to shrink beneath Foster's questions. Foster looked again at Angela. Why were you stopped? Angela answered simply. Sergeant Callahan said I looked at a silver Tesla while jogging. Foster's face went still. A Tesla? Yes. That was the suspicious activity? That was the only specific thing he identified. Callahan cut in. It wasn't just the car. She looked out of place and... He stopped. Too late. The words were already there. Foster stared at him. What did you say? Callahan's mouth opened. Nothing came. Across the street, James slowly lowered his phone just enough to look over it. Daniel's expression hardened. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Angela did not move. Foster repeated the question. You said she looked what? Callahan swallowed. I meant her behavior was inconsistent with the area. What behavior? Silence. Foster pointed down the sidewalk. Running? Callahan's face reddened. She was evasive. She asked why you stopped her. She refused identification. After you stopped her? Yes. For running past a car. I was conducting an investigation. Into what? Callahan had no answer. Angela watched the realization form inside Foster. Not just that the stop was weak, that there might never have been a lawful reason for it at all. Then Foster noticed the coin. Really noticed it. She stepped toward the cruiser hood. The scratched brass caught the sunlight. Her hand stopped above it. Where did this come from? Callahan looked relieved to discuss anything else. It was in her pouch. You took it? I conducted a search. Foster picked up the coin. The old West Haven police seal was worn nearly smooth around the edges. She turned it over. Serve first. Her fingers tightened around it. Angela watched quietly. Callahan noticed the reaction. What? Foster said nothing. She rubbed her thumb across a small mark near the rim. A tiny stamped number. Callahan had missed it completely. Foster had not. Her eyes lifted slowly toward Angela. Angela gave the faintest nod. The movement was almost invisible. But Foster understood. 22 years earlier, West Haven had issued only a limited set of those coins after a community service initiative in the South End. They were not sold in gift shops. They were not handed out at recruitment events. Each one had been numbered. Foster remembered seeing photographs from the ceremony in department archives. Young officers standing beneath fluorescent lights. Community leaders beside them. One black officer near the center holding a brass coin and trying not to smile too broadly. Foster looked at the woman in front of her now. The same eyes. Older. Calmer. But unmistakable. The color drained from Foster's face a second time. Callahan saw it. His confidence faltered. Captain. Foster looked down at the coin again, then at the cuffs cutting into Angela's wrists. She inhaled slowly. Sergeant Callahan. Yes, ma'am. Take those cuffs off. Callahan blinked. What? Foster's voice sharpened. Take those cuffs off. Callahan stared at Angela, then back at Foster. Captain, she's under arrest. For what? Obstruction. Resisting. Foster stepped closer. What crime was she committing before you decided she owed you her identity? Callahan's mouth went dry. What crime? No answer. Foster pointed toward Angela's wrists. Unlock them. Now. For the first time all morning, Mark Callahan looked afraid. He reached for the handcuff key. His fingers fumbled against his belt. Angela watched him without satisfaction. That was what unsettled him most. She did not look triumphant. She looked tired. Callahan finally found the key and moved behind her. The first cuff opened. Angela slowly brought one hand forward. A deep red line circled her wrist. Then the second cuff came free. She rubbed both wrists gently. Foster looked at the marks, then at the bruise beginning to rise along Angela's cheek. Callahan stepped backward. Captain, who is she? Foster did not answer immediately. Instead, she held up the brass coin. Do you have any idea whose service coin you just threw onto your hood? Callahan stared at it. The street fell silent again. But this silence was different. Before, it had belonged to fear. Now it belonged to the moment just before a truth became impossible to escape. Mark Callahan looked from the scratched brass coin in Captain Rebecca Foster's hand to Angela Carter standing beside the cruiser. He still did not understand. That was obvious. His breathing had changed. The certainty that had carried him through every demand, every accusation, every physical escalation was beginning to crack, but he was still searching for a version of events that would put him back in control. Captain, he said carefully, I don't know what that coin has to do with anything. Foster stared at him. That's part of the problem. Callahan's eyes narrowed. Angela rubbed one wrist with the fingers of her other hand. The metal had left angry red marks around both. Her cheeks still carried the outline of Callahan's palm. Foster noticed every mark. She had been expecting to meet Angela that morning under entirely different circumstances. At 10:30, Foster was supposed to pick her up for a quiet drive through several West Haven neighborhoods before Monday's official transition began. Angela had specifically asked that the tour remain informal. No motorcade, no press, no command staff. She wanted to see the city before the city began performing for its new chief. When Angela failed to answer a message, Foster had assumed she was delayed. Then dispatch traffic caught her attention. Female detained in Cedar Ridge. Obstruction. Resisting. A veteran sergeant requesting transport after what sounded like an unusually vague pedestrian stop. Foster had been only a few streets away. Now she understood why Angela had never arrived. Callahan pointed toward the coin. So she used to work for the department? Foster's gaze hardened. Angela said nothing. Callahan kept trying. Okay. Fine. Maybe she's former law enforcement. That doesn't change what happened here. Daniel Brooks gave him a long look. You may want to stop talking. Callahan turned on him. I know exactly what I'm saying. Daniel's expression made clear that he doubted it. Foster ignored both men. She stepped toward Angela. Are you sure you don't need medical attention? Angela gently moved her jaw. I'm all right for now. That wasn't what I asked. Angela almost smiled. The response was so familiar to Foster that it briefly softened the tension. I'll get checked. Foster nodded. Then she turned back toward Callahan. Start from the beginning. I already told you. Tell me again. Callahan glanced toward James Walker's phone. James continued recording. Callahan's voice became more formal. I observed the subject moving through Cedar Ridge in a manner I considered suspicious. What manner? She appeared to be monitoring residences and vehicles. Angela's eyes remained on him. Foster asked, What specifically did you see? She looked at a Tesla. A small silence followed. Foster waited. Callahan seemed to realize how weak the sentence sounded after it left his mouth. She was also evasive. When? When I questioned her. So the suspicious behavior that justified stopping her happened after you stopped her? Callahan's jaw tightened. No, that's not what I mean. Then explain what you mean. She didn't appear to fit the area. The words came out before he could stop them. James inhaled sharply. Emily Grant lowered the mail she still held against her chest. Daniel closed his eyes for an instant. Foster did not blink. Angela looked at Callahan with an expression almost sadder than angry. "What does that mean?" Foster asked. Callahan shifted his weight. "You know what I mean." "No," Foster said. "I want you to say what you mean." Callahan looked around. For the first time, he seemed aware of the entire audience. James, Emily, Daniel, the residents standing farther down the street, the phones, the patrol cruiser. Angela. He lowered his voice. She was a person I didn't recognize moving through an expensive residential area. Foster's eyes narrowed. "Plenty of people live in neighborhoods where you don't recognize them. I know that." "Then why was she different?" Callahan did not answer. Angela did. "Because I was the black woman he didn't recognize." Callahan's head turned. "I never said that. You didn't need to. I stopped you based on behavior." "What behavior?" He had nothing new to give her. Angela looked down briefly at her wrists. When she raised her eyes again, there was no anger in them. That somehow made Callahan look smaller. Foster glanced at the dark body camera mounted on his uniform. "Your camera isn't running." Callahan looked down. "There may have been a technical issue." Angela spoke quietly. "I mentioned that before he put his hands on me." Foster looked at him. "A technical issue?" "That's what it appears to be." James raised his phone. "Mine works." Every eye turned toward him. Callahan's face tightened. James continued. "I have the stop. I have her asking why she was detained. I have him grabbing her. And I have the slap." Foster slowly exhaled. "You have all of it?" "Not the very beginning. But everything before he touched her." Emily stepped forward another pace. "And I saw the rest." Callahan looked toward Foster. "Captain, witnesses don't always understand what they're seeing in police encounters." Daniel answered before Foster could. "Sometimes officers don't understand what they're doing either." "Stay out of this." Foster cut between them. "That's enough." Callahan stopped. Foster looked at the coin again. She held it carefully by its edges, as though it were more fragile than it looked. "This wasn't mass-produced," she said. Callahan's eyes dropped toward it. Foster turned the coin so the tiny number stamped near the rim caught the sunlight. "West Haven issued these 22 years ago. Limited service recognition. Community policing initiative." Something changed in James's expression. "That's where I've seen it." Everyone looked toward him. James nodded slowly. "The newspaper, years ago. They had a picture of officers getting those after the South End program started." Foster looked at Angela. Angela said nothing. She did not need to. Callahan's eyes moved between them. "What South End program?" Foster's expression almost became disbelief again. "You've been with West Haven 18 years. So? And you don't know the history of the department you supervise?" Callahan's face reddened. Foster held up the coin. "The officer who earned this one helped build one of West Haven's first diversion programs. She spent nights meeting residents who didn't trust police enough to come into headquarters. She convinced officers to stop treating every low-level encounter like a confrontation. The city recognized her for community service." Callahan looked at Angela. Really looked at her. Not the sweatshirt, not the running shoes. Her face. Something there felt almost familiar now. He searched his memory. An email, a photograph, a department announcement he had opened, skimmed, and forgotten. Foster saw recognition beginning, but refused to give him the answer yet. Instead, she asked, "Do you know why I'm in Cedar Ridge this morning?" Callahan slowly shook his head. "I had a meeting." "With who?" Foster looked toward Angela. "With the woman you just put in handcuffs." Callahan's face changed. His lips parted slightly. Angela still said nothing. A black city SUV. A captain appearing without being called. An old departmental service coin. The woman's precise knowledge of procedure. Her refusal to panic. Pieces Callahan had dismissed one by one were suddenly assembling into something he could no longer ignore. He looked at Angela again. "Who are you?" Angela held his gaze. Foster answered first. Before I tell you that, Sergeant, I want you to remember something. Callahan said nothing. 5 minutes ago, you believed her identity didn't matter unless she gave it to you on command. Foster lowered the coin. Whatever you learn next does not change whether what you did was right. The sentence struck harder than Callahan expected. Angela's expression softened slightly. Not toward him, toward the truth in Foster's words. Foster stepped closer to Callahan. You should not need a person's title before deciding whether they deserve lawful treatment. Callahan swallowed. Behind him, sunlight gleamed off the handcuffs he had just removed. For the first time, he seemed to understand that whatever revelation was coming would not save him by turning the incident into a misunderstanding. It would make the misunderstanding itself impossible to defend. Foster looked down once more at the scratched brass coin. Then she raised her eyes to Callahan. Sergeant, 22 years ago, this coin was awarded to Officer Angela Carter. Callahan stared at Angela. Foster continued. She left West Haven, built a career most officers in this department would be proud to have, and came home because this city asked her to lead. Callahan's face went still. The street held its breath. Foster took one final step toward him. Do you understand now whose service coin you threw onto your hood? Callahan's lips moved. No sound came out. Angela Carter stood beneath the same bright morning sun in the same faded gray sweatshirt. Only now Mark Callahan was beginning to understand that the woman he had decided did not belong in Cedar Ridge was connected to West Haven in a way he had never bothered to imagine. And Captain Foster had not yet spoken the title that would finish the truth. Callahan stared at Angela Carter as though her face might suddenly explain everything he had failed to notice. The faded gray sweatshirt had not changed. Neither had the running shoes, the single earbud now lying near the curb, or the small pouch he had searched without consent. But Callahan's eyes had changed. For the first time that morning, he was looking for reasons to respect her. Angela noticed. That hurt more than she expected. Captain Rebecca Foster held the scratched brass coin between two fingers. 22 years ago, Foster said, West Haven was struggling with trust in the South End. Too many ordinary encounters were becoming confrontations. Residents were afraid of officers, and officers were being taught to see whole neighborhoods as problems. James Walker lowered his phone just enough to listen. Daniel Brooks remained motionless beside the curb. Emily Grant still held the envelopes she had gathered from the pavement. Foster continued. A group of officers proposed something different. They started meeting adults where they lived. Churches, community kitchens, apartment buildings, bus stops. They created alternatives for low-level encounters that didn't need to end with somebody in cuffs. Her thumb moved across the worn edge of the coin. One young patrol officer did more work on that program than almost anyone. Callahan looked at Angela. A memory surfaced. Not a real memory of her. An email. 2 weeks earlier, West Haven Police Department leadership transition. He remembered scrolling through it while eating lunch at his desk. Incoming Chief Angela Carter. There had been a formal photograph. Dark suit. Professional lighting. A face he had barely studied because Monday seemed far away, and the announcement had felt like another administrative change that would have little to do with his patrol shift. He had glanced at the biography. Former West Haven officer. Command experience in larger departments. Returning home. Then he had closed the email. Now he stared at the woman standing 6 feet away. No, he whispered. Foster heard him. Yes. Callahan shook his head once, slowly. Angela's expression remained composed. There was no pleasure in watching recognition spread across his face. Foster stepped closer. That young officer was Angela Carter. James's eyebrows rose. Emily looked from Foster to Angela. Daniel lowered his chin, understanding before Callahan fully did. Foster continued. She eventually left West Haven. She spent years building experience outside the city. Patrol, community operations, major command responsibilities. She developed a reputation for reducing complaints without telling officers to stop doing their jobs. Callahan's mouth had gone dry. Captain. Foster ignored him. When West Haven needed new leadership, the city asked her to come home. A breeze stirred the maple branches. The sound of leaves seemed impossibly loud. Foster looked directly at Callahan. Sergeant Mark Callahan, this is Chief Angela Carter. Nobody moved. The sentence crossed the street almost softly, yet it hit Callahan with more force than any shout could have. His face drained of color. He looked at Angela, then at Foster, then back at Angela. "Chief?" The word barely came out. Angela finally spoke. "I take command of your department Monday." Callahan's lips parted. Nothing followed. Across Cedar Ridge, the adults who had remained quiet suddenly began whispering. "Oh my God, that's the new chief? He hit his own chief." Emily heard the murmurs and felt something painful twist inside her. 5 minutes earlier, these same people had watched Angela being handled like a criminal. Now that a title had been attached to her name, outrage became easier. Angela heard it too. Her eyes moved slowly across the houses. A man who had watched from a driveway shook his head dramatically now. Another resident stepped closer. Someone muttered that Callahan was finished. Angela felt no comfort in any of it. She had been the same woman before the title was spoken. The slap had hurt the same. The cuffs had been just as tight. The law had been exactly the same. Only the crowd's perception had changed. Callahan seemed to realize something similar, but for a different reason. His career was suddenly visible to him. 18 years, promotions, pension, reputation, all of it standing on the edge of the same curb where Angela's earbud lay. "Chief Carter," he began, "if I had known—" Angela's eyes locked onto his. He stopped. The silence that followed made him understand his mistake before she said anything. "If you had known what?" Callahan swallowed. "I mean, your position." Angela took one small step toward him. Her wrists carried red lines from his handcuffs. "So if you had known my position, you would have treated me differently?" "No. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant." Callahan looked toward Foster as if she might help him. She did not. Angela's voice remained calm. "You thought I was an ordinary black woman jogging through a neighborhood where you decided I didn't belong." Callahan shook his head. "I observed suspicious behavior." "What behavior?" "The vehicle. Your refusal to identify yourself. The refusal happened after you stopped me." He went quiet. Angela pointed toward the silver Tesla visible in the distance. "That car?" Callahan nodded reluctantly. "I looked at it because sunlight reflected off the windshield." His face flushed. Angela continued. "You turned that into suspicion. Then when I asked you to explain yourself, you turned questions into defiance. When I asked for your badge number, you turned accountability into a threat." She touched her cheek lightly. "And when I asked James to keep recording, you turned your frustration into this." Nobody whispered anymore. Even the neighbors who had suddenly discovered their outrage fell silent. Callahan tried once more. "I was trying to maintain control of the situation." Angela looked at him with something deeper than anger. "Sergeant, you created the situation." The words landed. Daniel Brooks glanced toward James. James still had his phone raised, but his expression was different now. Not triumphant. Haunted. Angela saw it. That expression caught her attention more than Callahan's fear. She looked toward James. He had been at Morning Star that morning. He had carried coffee through the rear door. He had joked with her over a broken pantry shelf. Yet now his face held something she had not seen there. Recognition. Not recognition of her rank. Recognition of the encounter. Angela looked back at Callahan. "When you grabbed me," she said, "you didn't know who I was." Callahan said nothing. "When you slapped me, you didn't know." His eyes dropped. "When you put me in handcuffs and told dispatch I was combative, you still didn't know." "Chief, That matters." Callahan raised his head. Angela's voice softened. It became more dangerous because of it. "Because nothing about what happened should become wrong only because I'm your chief." Foster's grip tightened around the brass coin. Angela looked toward the residents. "If I worked at Morning Star full-time, would that slap have been more acceptable?" No one answered. "If I were a home health worker?" Silence. "A delivery driver?" Nothing. "If I were retired and walking home with groceries?" James's face changed. Angela saw it immediately. Something passed through his eyes. Pain. Old anger. Shame that did not belong to him. Angela turned fully toward him. James? He lowered the phone a few inches. Callahan's face tightened again. Whatever he saw in James made him suddenly uneasy. But Angela was not finished with him. She faced Callahan one more time. You asked me who I was. She paused. Now I'm asking you something. Callahan waited. Angela's eyes dropped briefly toward the cuffs hanging from his hand, then to the marks around her wrists, then back to his face. How many? Callahan frowned. I don't understand. Angela did not explain. She looked at James. For several seconds, the retired transit mechanic stood completely still beneath the shade of his porch tree. Then he lowered his phone. His voice came quietly from across the street. Me. Everyone turned. James walked slowly toward the sidewalk. He stopped well away from Callahan, but he no longer looked afraid of him. 8 months ago, James said. He did it to me. Callahan's face changed instantly, and Angela understood that discovering who she was had not ended the story. It had just opened the first file. James Walker stood at the edge of his lawn with his phone lowered to his side. For the first time since the confrontation began, Mark Callahan looked genuinely unsettled by someone other than Angela. You? Callahan said. James nodded. 8 months ago. Captain Rebecca Foster turned toward him. What happened? James looked at Callahan before answering. It was not the look of a man enjoying revenge. It was the look of someone reopening a door he had spent months trying to keep shut. I was walking home from the pharmacy on Madison Avenue. His voice was steady, but his thumb rubbed nervously along the edge of his phone. I'd picked up a prescription and some groceries. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Callahan shifted his weight. This isn't the time to relitigate an old complaint. Angela's eyes moved to him. You remember it? Callahan said nothing. That silence answered enough. James continued. It was around 6 in the evening, still light outside. Sergeant Callahan pulled over and asked where I was going. Emily Grant slowly walked closer to the curb. Daniel Brooks listened without interrupting. James glanced toward the quiet homes around Cedar Ridge. He asked for my ID. I asked why. He said there had been concerns about theft in the area. Angela felt something cold move through her. The phrasing was almost identical. Property concerns. Suspicious activity. Identification. James took a breath. I told him I lived 3 streets away. Callahan finally spoke. You were acting evasive. James looked at him. I was carrying a pharmacy bag. You refused to cooperate. I asked why you wanted to search it. Callahan's jaw tightened. James's voice grew quieter. He put me against the hood of his cruiser. No one moved. He searched the bag anyway. Found blood pressure medication, toothpaste, canned soup, and a receipt. James gave a small, humorless smile. Apparently none of those were stolen enough to arrest me. Emily lowered her eyes. Daniel's face hardened. Angela asked, Were you charged with anything? No. Cited? No. How long were you detained? James thought for a moment. Maybe 25 minutes. Felt longer. Foster had gone strangely still. Angela noticed. Did you file a complaint? James looked at Foster. Yes. Something changed in Foster's expression. Not surprise. Recognition. James saw it too. You remember me? Foster did not answer immediately. Then she said, I remember the file. James's face fell. Angela turned toward her. You reviewed it? Foster exhaled slowly. I signed the final disposition. The words landed with almost as much force as the reveal of Angela's title. James stared at her. You signed it. Foster's voice dropped. Yes, and never talk to me. No. The honesty did not soften the damage. James looked away toward his porch. For 8 months, he had tried to convince himself that the complaint process had simply failed because evidence was limited. Now the person who had approved the closure was standing 20 feet away, admitting she had never asked him what happened. What did the disposition say? Angela asked. Foster did not need a file to remember the language. Insufficient evidence to sustain misconduct. James laughed once. There was no amusement in it. Insufficient evidence. Foster looked at him. I relied on the supervisory summary and available documentation. What documentation? The officer report, dispatch notes, body camera review. James's eyes narrowed. Body camera? Callahan looked away. James noticed. So there was video? Foster hesitated. The summary said the available footage did not establish misconduct. James stepped closer. Did you watch it? Foster's silence returned. Angela already knew the answer. You didn't, she said. Foster's face tightened with shame. I reviewed the supervisor's findings. James lowered his head. For a moment, he looked older than 62. I wrote 6 pages. Foster swallowed. I know. I wrote down the street, the time, what he said, what I was carrying. I even included the pharmacy receipt. Angela looked at Foster, and leadership reduced all of that to a summary. Foster nodded once. The admission seemed physically painful. Callahan seized on it. The complaint was investigated. I was cleared. Angela turned toward him. No. A complaint was closed. Callahan's expression hardened. That's the same thing. No, Angela said. It isn't. Her voice remained calm, but everyone on the street heard the distinction. James looked toward Angela. When the letter came, I almost threw it away. He paused. It said they appreciated my concern. His mouth tightened. Appreciated my concern. Angela had read letters like that before. Professional language, neutral language, language capable of making someone feel dismissed without ever admitting they had been dismissed. James continued. I stopped walking that route after that. Emily looked at him. You live here? I know. The simplicity of the answer hurt. James nodded toward Callahan. But after that night, I started driving 2 minutes to the pharmacy instead. Angela's eyes settled on Callahan. That was the consequence paperwork rarely captured. A man changing how he moved through his own neighborhood because one officer had taught him that ordinary freedom could become a confrontation without warning. Angela looked at James. I'm sorry. James shook his head. You didn't do it? No. Angela glanced toward Foster, but the department did. Foster did not defend herself. For the first time that morning, she looked less like a captain and more like someone realizing the cost of a decision she had once considered routine. I should have called you, she said. James stared at her. Yes, Foster accepted it. I should have read your full statement myself. Yes. I should have asked why the stop happened in the first place. James's eyes glistened, but he did not look away. Yes. Callahan shifted impatiently. One complaint doesn't prove a pattern. Angela turned toward him. You remember James before he finished describing the stop. Callahan went silent. You remembered enough to call it an old complaint. It was months ago, and yet you knew exactly what he meant when he said, me. Callahan's face tightened. Daniel Brooks stepped forward. Chief Carter, if there are prior complaints, today's recording changes the significance of all of them. Callahan looked at him sharply. Angela understood immediately. James had something the previous complaint did not. Video. A clean view of Callahan taking an unsupported encounter and escalating it because someone questioned his authority. One case could provide context for another. Angela looked toward James's phone. Don't send that video to anyone yet. James frowned. You want me to delete it? No. Her answer came instantly. I want the original preserved exactly as it is. No edits, no clips, no social media compression. Daniel can help you make a protected copy. Daniel nodded. Callahan's anxiety sharpened. Chief, this is getting blown out of proportion. Angela faced him. You slapped me. He said nothing. You handcuffed me. Nothing. You reported that I was combative. Callahan's eyes dropped. And now a man standing 30 feet from where you detained me says you used nearly the same reasoning against him 8 months ago. Angela stepped closer. How many complaints have been filed against you? I don't know. Angela studied him. You don't know? I've been an officer 18 years. People complain. The casualness of the answer changed the air. James's face hardened. Emily shook her head. Foster closed her eyes for a second. Angela spoke quietly. People complain. Callahan realized too late how the words sounded. That isn't what I meant. Angela looked toward Foster. How many? Foster hesitated. I don't know the exact number. Can you access it? Yes. Then do it. Foster took out her department phone. Callahan stepped toward her. Captain, before you start pulling files on the street, we should handle this through normal channels. Foster looked at him. Normal channels are why James is standing here telling us nobody listened. Callahan stopped. Foster opened the internal complaint system. Her thumb moved across the screen. Search. Callahan, Mark. For several seconds, the small loading symbol turned. Angela watched Foster's expression. James watched too. Then the results appeared. Foster's eyes stopped moving. Angela saw the change immediately. How many? Foster did not answer. Rebecca. Foster slowly raised her eyes from the screen. The shame in her face had become something worse. Dread. There are more than I remembered. Angela held out her hand. Foster gave her the phone. Angela looked at the list. Complaint after complaint stretched down the screen. Some closed, some downgraded, some marked unfounded. Different dates, different names, different neighborhoods, but enough recurring language to make Angela's stomach tighten. Suspicious behavior, failure to cooperate, officer safety. She scrolled once, then again. Callahan watched her, his face losing color. Angela stopped scrolling. The morning had begun with one woman being told she did not belong. Now the department's own records suggested she had never been the first. And somewhere inside those closed files was the answer to the question Callahan had been unable to face. How many? By Monday morning, West Haven Police Headquarters no longer felt like a building preparing to welcome a new chief. It felt like a place waiting for an audit. Rain streaked the tall front windows and turned the parking lot outside into a sheet of gray reflections. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over rows of desks, locked evidence rooms, records cabinets, and computer screens now displaying years of complaints no one had expected to revisit. Angela Carter arrived before 7. The bruise on her cheek had darkened slightly. The red marks around her wrists had faded, but not disappeared. She wore a charcoal suit instead of the gray sweatshirt. The difference in how people looked at her was immediate. Officers who had never met her stood straighter. Supervisors appeared in hallways with carefully neutral expressions. Administrative staff lowered their voices when she passed. Angela noticed all of it. Saturday morning, dressed for a run, she had been treated as suspicious. Monday morning, dressed as Chief Angela Carter, doors opened before she touched them. That contrast followed her into the conference room. Captain Rebecca Foster was already there. So was Daniel Brooks, invited as an outside legal observer for evidence preservation, along with an independent investigative team authorized by the city to review the Callahan matter without Angela controlling the outcome. On the center table sat sealed digital copies of James Walker's original phone video. Angela had insisted on 3 copies, one for investigators, one secured by the city attorney's office, one retained untouched as an evidentiary master. No one would be able to say later that the footage had vanished. Foster placed a printed list in front of Angela. Complaint history. Angela looked down. The stack was thicker than she expected. How many involve pedestrian stops or discretionary questioning? Enough that I stopped counting from the summary screen and pulled the full records. Angela opened the first file. The name was Denise Walker, 59, black, home health worker. Denise had been leaving the home of an adult client in an affluent neighborhood when Callahan stopped her near her parked car. Reason given: suspicious presence. Angela read the statement twice. Denise had shown her employer identification, then her driver's license, then the address of the client she had just assisted. Callahan still detained her while verifying what he called inconsistent information. No contraband. No arrest. No citation. Complaint outcome. Not sustained. Angela turned the page. Walter Price, 68. Disabled veteran, waiting for a rideshare outside a condominium complex after visiting another adult veteran. Callahan had asked why he was standing near the entrance. Walter explained. Callahan demanded identification. Walter questioned why. The report then described escalating non-compliance. Angela stopped reading. What did Walter say happened? Foster slid over the civilian's statement. Walter said Callahan had ordered him to place both hands on a patrol car while his bag was searched. The bag contained medication, a paperback novel, and a folded Veterans Clinic appointment sheet. No arrest, no charges. Complaint closed. Angela's face tightened. Next, Marcus Reed, 31, delivery driver. He had carried groceries into an upscale apartment building for a customer, then walked back toward his vehicle. Callahan stopped him in the loading area, asked which apartment he had visited, asked for identification, asked to search his insulated delivery bag. Marcus refused consent. Callahan detained him until another resident confirmed the delivery. The report described Marcus as argumentative. Angela looked at Foster. Same language? Foster nodded. Different people, same pattern. The fourth file belonged to Thomas Miller, 46, black restaurant owner. Stopped less than a block from his own restaurant after closing late. Callahan said, Thomas matched the general behavior of someone checking closed businesses. Thomas had been carrying the night deposit bag from his restaurant. The officer searched him. The bank deposit was verified. The complaint was downgraded to a communication issue. Angela leaned back. Outside the conference room glass, officers moved through headquarters pretending not to look in. Daniel broke the silence. The pattern isn't just the stops. Angela looked at him. It's the language afterward. He pointed to the reports. Suspicious, evasive, failed to cooperate. Officer safety, argumentative, combative. Foster's eyes dropped. The same words Callahan had used about Angela. Angela touched the edge of James Walker's file. Pull the body camera logs. One of the investigators turned to a laptop. Records populated on the screen. Dates. Activation times. Upload gaps. Missing segments. Foster moved closer. There, she pointed. James Walker's stop. Body camera activated late. Recording began after James had already been placed against the cruiser. Angela felt her stomach tighten. Saturday? Another search. Callahan's camera showed no usable recording during Angela's detention. Technical failure entered after the incident. Daniel stared at the screen. That's 2. The investigator continued. Then 3. Then 5. Then more. Not every stop had missing footage, but enough discretionary encounters involving complaints showed delayed activations, interrupted files, or unexplained gaps to demand scrutiny. Foster sank into a chair. I signed reviews that referenced these recordings. Angela looked at her. Did you see the original files? Foster shook her head. I trusted supervisory summaries. The answer echoed what she had admitted to James. This time, there was nowhere to hide from it. Angela spoke quietly. Then we don't just have a Callahan problem. Foster looked up. No. We have a review problem. Rain tapped against the windows. The room felt colder. By noon, Denise Walker arrived at headquarters. She had almost refused. Daniel had called her personally and told her an independent review was reopening the complaint. Denise entered wearing hospital scrubs beneath a dark coat. She looked tired, not frightened, tired of explaining. Angela met her without introducing herself as Chief First. I'm Angela Carter. Denise studied her face. I know who you are. The bruise made that impossible not to know. Denise's expression softened. I saw what happened. Angela nodded. I'm sorry it took that for someone to call you back. Denise looked toward the conference room. So now you believe me? Angela did not offer an excuse. We should have believed enough to investigate you properly the first time. Denise held her gaze. That answer seemed to matter. Walter Price came later. Then Marcus Reed. Thomas Miller arrived after the lunch rush at his restaurant. One by one, adults who had once written statements into a system that answered with form letters walked through the same headquarters doors. Not because Angela wanted a spectacle, because she wanted them heard. The emotional weight shifted. Saturday had been about what Callahan did to Angela. Monday became about what the department had failed to do for everyone else. Late in the afternoon, one investigator called Foster over. "You need to see this." On the monitor was James Walker's original complaint file. Not the final summary, the internal working copy. Two versions of Callahan's report appeared side by side. Angela leaned forward. The first version described James as questioning the reason for the stop. The later version said he had become agitated and physically evasive. Daniel pointed at the timestamps. That language was added after the complaint was filed. Foster stared at the screen. Who approved the amended report? The investigator clicked the metadata. A supervisor authorization field appeared. Foster's face went pale. Angela saw it. Who? Foster did not answer immediately. The name on the screen belonged to someone still serving inside West Haven Command. Someone who had reviewed Callahan's explanation after James complained. Someone who had approved the altered language. The room fell silent. Angela looked through the glass wall toward the officers moving beyond it. The investigation had just crossed another line. This was no longer about whether one sergeant had abused discretion. It was about whether someone above him had helped turn misconduct into paperwork clean enough to disappear. 2 weeks later, every seat in West Haven's municipal public safety chamber was filled. Hard fluorescent light washed over polished wood panels and rows of folding chairs. News cameras stood along the rear wall. Reporters whispered over open notebooks, while microphones waited beneath the city seal at the front of the room. Angela Carter entered through a side door. The bruise on her cheek was gone. The memory was not. She wore a dark suit, and the scratched brass serve first coin rested unseen in her pocket. There was no visible trace of the woman Callahan had handcuffed beside a patrol cruiser, except for the calm in her face. The same calm he had mistaken for defiance. People stood when they recognized her. Angela wished they had found that courage when she wore a gray sweatshirt. She took her seat beside the independent investigator rather than at the center of the hearing table. The chair of the civilian review panel leaned toward the microphone. "Chief Carter, as the complaining party in the incident involving Sergeant Callahan, you have declined to participate in the disciplinary decision." "Yes." "Why?" Angela looked across the room. Mark Callahan sat beside his representative. He looked different without the certainty of patrol authority surrounding him. "I cannot ask this department to rebuild public trust," Angela said, while placing myself in the position of judging the officer accused of assaulting me. A camera shutter clicked. The evidence should decide his case, not my anger. Callahan lowered his eyes. The independent investigator began with James Walker. James walked to the witness table carrying no phone this time. The video had already been authenticated and preserved. He sat beneath the fluorescent lights and described the evening 8 months earlier when he had walked home from a pharmacy carrying medication and groceries. He described being stopped, questioned, searched, pressed against Callahan's cruiser. Then he described the complaint. "I thought filing it was what responsible people were supposed to do." His voice tightened. "I thought if something went wrong, you wrote it down and somebody looked at it." The panel chair asked, "What happened instead?" James looked toward Rebecca Foster. "I got a letter." Foster sat several chairs away. She did not look away. James continued. "It told me there wasn't enough evidence." The investigator displayed Callahan's reports on a large screen, 2 versions. The first said James had questioned the basis of the stop. The amended version said he had become agitated and physically evasive. Then came the metadata. The changes had been entered after James filed his complaint. A command-level supervisor still serving in West Haven had approved the amendment and accepted Callahan's explanation without requiring the inconsistency to be resolved. That supervisor had been removed from complaint review duties, pending a separate investigation. A murmur traveled through the chamber. Angela remained still. One bad stop could be dismissed as poor judgment. One altered report could be called an exception. But patterns became harder to hide when people finally stood beside one another. Denise Walker testified next. At 59, she had spent years entering other people's homes as a home health worker, helping adults who depended on her. "I was leaving my client's house," she said. Sergeant Callahan saw a black woman walking away from an expensive home and decided that needed explaining. She described showing identification, employment information, the client's address. None of it had immediately ended the detention. "What did you feel?" a panel member asked. Denise paused. "Small." The single word quieted the room. "I spend my days helping people keep their dignity when illness has taken away parts of their independence. And that afternoon, I stood on a sidewalk trying to prove I had permission to exist where he found me." Walter Price came after her. 68. Disabled veteran. He described waiting for a rideshare and being ordered against a patrol vehicle while Callahan checked his bag. "I wore a uniform once," Walter said. "That taught me something. A uniform is supposed to make you more responsible for your behavior, not less." Marcus Reed described carrying groceries into an apartment building and emerging to questions about whether he belonged there. Thomas Miller described being stopped near the restaurant he owned. Different adults, different days, the same humiliation. Then James's video played. The chamber watched Angela standing in her faded gray sweatshirt. They heard her ask why she was being detained. They heard Callahan fail to name an underlying crime. They watched him grab her wrist. They heard her say she was not resisting. Then came the slap. A few people in the audience flinched. Angela did not. She watched the crowd instead. Callahan's false radio report followed. Combative female. Obstruction. Resisting. Then the video showed Angela standing quietly in handcuffs. The contradiction required no explanation. When the lights came back up, Callahan looked toward the table. His face was pale. The investigator summarized the allegations. Unjustified force, false reporting, discriminatory enforcement, improper search, failures involving body camera policy, and dishonesty during an official encounter. Callahan was facing termination proceedings, but the hearing was no longer only about him. The review had expanded to complaint supervision, body camera auditing, report amendments, and command accountability. Then Rebecca Foster was called. She took the seat James had occupied. "Captain Foster," the investigator said, "did you sign the disposition closing Mr. Walker's complaint?" "Yes." "Did you interview him?" "No." "Did you personally review every original document and recording referenced in the supervisory summary?" "No." "Why not?" Foster looked toward James. "Because I trusted a process that was easier for the department than listening to the person who challenged it." No one moved. She continued. "That was a failure of leadership, mine included." James stared at her. There was pain in his expression, but something else now, too. Acknowledgement did not erase what happened, but it mattered. Finally, Angela was asked to testify. She approached the microphone. The room seemed to lean toward her. Angela looked first at Callahan, then at James, Denise, Walter, Marcus, and Thomas. When Sergeant Callahan stopped me, she said, "He did not know I was his incoming chief." Callahan's eyes dropped. "That fact has received more attention than anything else about this case." Angela paused. "But it is the least important fact." The room went still. "The scandal is not that Sergeant Callahan slapped his new chief." Her voice remained steady. "The scandal is that people had to wait until he slapped someone with power before we believed the powerless." James closed his eyes. Denise reached for his hand. Angela continued. "James told us 8 months earlier." She looked at Denise. "Denise told us. Then Walter. Walter told us. Marcus? Marcus told us. Thomas? Thomas told us." Her gaze moved toward the command staff. "They did what we asked citizens to do. They reported their experiences, and too often, this institution treated their lack of status as a lack of credibility. No one behind the command table moved." Angela took the scratched coin from her pocket. She placed it beside the microphone. "Serve first, faced upward. This department gave me this 22 years ago." A camera shutter clicked. It was supposed to represent service before ego, restraint before power, listening before judgment. She looked toward Callahan. "I will not use my position to seek revenge against you." Callahan slowly raised his eyes. But neither will I use compassion as an excuse to protect you from accountability. The distinction settled over the room. The civilian panel would decide the disciplinary findings. The independent investigation would continue. The command-level approval of altered reports would be examined separately, and every closed complaint connected to the pattern would be reviewed again. Angela returned to her seat. The hearing adjourned after sunset. Outside, rain had stopped. Streetlights shimmered across the wet pavement as reporters crowded the steps. James emerged beside Denise and Walter. For once, cameras were pointed at the people whose stories had previously disappeared into files. Foster stopped beside Angela inside the doorway. "What happens now?" Angela watched James speaking to a reporter through the glass. "We could punish everyone who failed." Foster waited. Angela touched the coin in her palm. "Or we could make sure failure becomes harder to repeat." "You think the department will accept that?" Angela looked toward the headquarters building several blocks away. "I'm not asking whether it's comfortable." She slipped the coin back into her pocket. "For years, this department taught people to bring us their complaints and trust the process." Her eyes returned to James. "Now we have to build a process worthy of that trust." Callahan's fate would soon be decided. But Angela had one larger decision left. She could let the scandal end with one officer losing his badge, or she could force West Haven to change what had allowed him to keep it for so long. Angela Carter chose the harder path. 3 months later, winter sunlight fell through the windows of West Haven Police Headquarters, turning the polished floor pale gold. On the wall outside Angela's office hung a new public notice explaining how civilian complaints would be received, preserved, reviewed, and appealed. It was not there for decoration. Neither were the changes behind it. Mark Callahan had been dismissed after the independent disciplinary process sustained findings involving unjustified force, false reporting, improper conduct during Angela's detention, and dishonesty surrounding the encounter. The separate supervisory investigation continued into the handling of amended reports and earlier complaint closures. Angela had refused to interfere with either process. She never called the investigators to demand a particular outcome. She never asked for Callahan to suffer, because she had suffered. She asked only that the evidence receive something James Walker had been denied 8 months earlier. A fair hearing. But removing Callahan was only the beginning. West Haven rewrote its body camera retention procedures. Unexplained recording gaps and discretionary stops now triggered supervisory review instead of disappearing into routine paperwork. Pedestrian detentions required officers to document the specific legal justification for the stop, rather than relying on phrases like suspicious behavior without supporting facts. Repeated complaints against the same officer were automatically flagged. Civilian statements could no longer be reduced to a supervisor's summary without preservation of the complete original. And complaints involving questionable stops were reviewed outside the officer's immediate chain of command. Some officers disliked the changes. Angela expected that. One veteran supervisor told her the department was becoming afraid to police. Angela answered without raising her voice. "No. I'm asking officers to be able to explain why they use authority before they use it." The conversation ended there. Yet the reform Angela cared about most could not be written into policy. Listening. That required people. So on a cold Saturday morning, Angela returned to Morningstar Community Kitchen. Warm yellow light spilled through the front windows onto the south end sidewalk. Inside, dishes clinked against metal counters. Coffee steamed in large silver urns. The smell of bread and onions filled the room. Angela entered carrying 2 boxes. Helen Price saw her immediately. "Put one down." Angela laughed. "Good morning to you, too. You're the police chief now. That doesn't make your back younger. Apparently authority has limits." Not apparently. Definitely. For the first time in weeks, Angela laughed without having to think about cameras, hearings, reports, or disciplinary findings. She carried 1 box into the pantry. The shelf she had repaired months earlier was still holding. James Walker was crouched beside a lower food storage rack with a wrench in one hand. Angela stopped. "That thing giving you trouble?" James looked over his shoulder. "Loose bolt." Angela set down the box. "Move over. You run a police department. And I can tighten a bolt. So can I." James handed her the wrench. They worked without speaking for a while. There was something peaceful about it. 2 adults kneeling beneath a pantry shelf, repairing something small after spending months confronting something much larger. Finally, James said, "I walked to the pharmacy again." Angela stopped turning the wrench. She looked at him. James shrugged. "First time felt strange." Angela smiled. "But you went." "I went." That mattered more to her than any headline. Later that afternoon, Morningstar hosted a community meeting in its dining room. No marble podium, no police headquarters, no rows of uniforms separating officials from residents, just folding chairs, coffee cups, warm lights, and people who knew what it meant to be overlooked. Denise Walker sat near the front in a burgundy sweater instead of work scrubs. Walter Price rested his cane against his chair. Marcus Reed had come after finishing his delivery shift. Thomas Miller brought trays of food from his restaurant and refused payment. Emily Grant arrived still looking tired from hospital work. Daniel Brooks stood near the back. Rebecca Foster sat beside James. Angela waited until everyone settled. Then she walked to the small wooden podium. The scratched brass coin was in her hand. She placed it on the top. "Serve first." The room became quiet. "Most people know why my name became part of this story," Angela began. "No microphone was necessary. But I don't want today to be about what happened to me." She looked toward James. "It should be about the people who spoke before anyone thought listening was important." James lowered his eyes. Angela continued. "James filed a complaint when there were no cameras waiting outside headquarters." She looked at Denise. Denise told the truth when it would have been easier to decide nobody cared. Walter. Walter reminded us that wearing a uniform increases responsibility. Marcus. Marcus questioned an encounter he knew was wrong. Thomas. Thomas refused to accept that owning a business still required him to prove he belonged beside it. Angela rested her fingers beside the coin. They did not suddenly become credible because the police chief had a similar experience. Her voice softened. They were credible before anyone listened. Rebecca Foster looked down, Angela noticed. Foster had carried her own consequence from the investigation. She remained captain, but the failure in James's complaint had become part of her record and, more importantly, part of how she led. When Angela had offered her an opportunity to transfer away from complaint oversight permanently, Foster had declined. "I failed there," she had said. "I need to help fix it." Angela had respected that answer. Not because apology erased harm, because accountability meant accepting responsibility without demanding immediate forgiveness. Angela looked across the room. A badge means nothing if dignity only belongs to people important enough to fight back. Silence followed. Then James stood. Not dramatically, just slowly. Others followed. Angela did not need applause, but it came anyway. She looked down at the old coin while the sound filled Morningstar. For 22 years, serve first had reminded her of what authority was supposed to mean. Now the words felt different, not lighter. Earned again. Several days later, the morning sky over Cedar Ridge was clear. Angela stepped outside in the faded gray sweatshirt. The same one. She could have thrown it away. For a while she had considered it, but the sweatshirt had done nothing wrong. Neither had she. She placed her house key and the brass coin inside her running pouch. Then she put in her earbuds and started jogging. The neighborhood moved around her. Sprinklers clicked. A garage door rose. Morning traffic murmured beyond the trees. She passed the driveway where the silver Tesla had been parked that Saturday. There was another car there now. Angela barely noticed. Halfway down Hawthorne Lane, a West Haven patrol cruiser appeared behind her. For an instant, her body remembered before her mind could stop it. Her shoulders tightened. Her pace faltered. She heard again the command to stop, felt Callahan's hand around her wrist, heard the slap, saw the silent faces. Angela drew one slow breath. The cruiser approached, then passed. No siren, no demand, no assumption that her presence required explanation. The officer behind the wheel gave a simple nod. Angela returned it. Then she kept running. Morning sunlight flickered through the maple branches and moved across the pavement ahead of her. Inside the pouch, the scratched brass coin tapped softly against her house key with every stride. Angela thought of Walter Carter. Her father had once walked into Morningstar ashamed because he needed help. The people there had taught him that receiving kindness did not reduce his worth. Years later, he had taught Angela the same lesson in another form. Dignity mattered most when nobody was watching. Angela finally understood the other half of it. Power mattered most when nobody important was watching either. Mark Callahan had failed because he believed respect could depend on who stood in front of him. Westhaven had failed because it had listened more carefully to authority than to ordinary people. The city could not undo those failures, but it could refuse to repeat them. Angela reached the end of Hawthorne Lane and turned toward home. Her breathing was steady now. Behind her was the street where someone had once decided she did not belong. Ahead of her, sunlight spread across Westhaven. She kept running, and one question remained long after the sound of her footsteps disappeared down the quiet street. If Angela Carter had not been the new police chief, would anyone have believed her? The hardest truth was that Angela deserved to be believed before anyone knew the title waiting beside her name. This story reminds us that a system proves its integrity not by how quickly it responds when a powerful person is harmed, but by how seriously it listens when an ordinary person speaks. Accountability begins when the truth matters just as much without status, influence, or a familiar name attached to it. So today, if someone tells you they were treated unfairly, resist the urge to decide too quickly that there must be another side that makes their experience disappear. Give them one quiet minute of your full attention, the kind of attention Angela knew James and the others should have received the first time they spoke. What do you think would have happened if Angela had never been revealed as Westhaven's new police chief? Tell me below and stay with me because the next story begins with another ordinary moment that is not nearly as ordinary as it seems.